In case you missed it, I recently shared what I would consider to be probably my biggest life announcement to date, and that is that we moved. And not only did we moved into a brand new apartment that we own. And not only did we move into a new apartment that we own, but we actually made a bunch of updates to this space before moving in here. We renovated two bathrooms and our kitchen, and it was quite an experience. And now that I can reflect back on the last few months, and now that the renovation is complete, the contractors are done, we've handed over our last payments, I really wanted to take some time to share my thoughts and some advice potentially for what actually goes into a renovation from the initial brainstorm and design all the way up through the final, I don't know, picture getting hung on the wall, so to speak. And I feel like this is a perfect chance to do that now that we are actually moved in here and we've had a chance to settle in. So today I want to share some tangible tips and my advice for tackling a home renovation so that you can avoid mistakes, save time and money, and ultimately create your dream home. I do also want to mention that I am recording this the day before it comes out. I actually tried to record this a couple of times yesterday, and there's just a lot of construction going on in Hoboken right now. It actually is not picking up too much on the mic, but it's just like distracting for me when jackhammering starts, and then I get confused about where I was at and what's going on. So we're going to just put on the mental blockers, zone in and focus because I really want to get this episode up for you guys, and I'm really happy with how the outline turned out. Before we talk all things renovation, let's do a little create and consume as we do at the top of every episode. And unsurprisingly, what I've been creating this week is a lot of content about the renovation, obviously including this podcast episode. But to use this episode would probably be cheating in the creation category. So if you want to see some other renovation content, I have a whole vlog up on my YouTube channel where I documented each week of the process and shared weekly updates real time as they were happening. So it's really cool to look at where we started versus where we ended up. And if you follow me on Instagram, which is just my name, Austen Tosone, I also shared like a before and after carousel of each room. So you can see what it looks like now and what it looked like when we first started. And honestly, it is giving unrecognizable. I feel like I am so proud of the complete transformation. It looks like a totally different space from when we started, which was sort of the point, obviously, with some restrictions of the fact that, this is an apartment that has square rooms for the most part. And I am also working on editing some fun before and after, like quick little transition clips for short form that I want to share soon too. So be sure to keep up with me on all the platforms. Everything's always linked in the show notes. I mean, I'm really not that hard to find. There's like one Austen Tosone out in the world, and it's me. And then as far as what I'm consuming this week, listen, since the last episode came out, we do have a new Taylor Swift album to discuss. However, I feel as though that needs to be a whole separate episode. Don't get me wrong. I've listened to it probably like 3 or 4 times through all the way, but I want to like listen to it with a notepad and actually write stuff down because I do think it would be fun to do a breakdown of the whole album and what some of the best songs are, lyrics, all of that stuff. And also some of what didn't work as well for me, which, I'm a Swiftie through and through. I have been a Taylor fan since middle school, like literally since the song Teardrops on My Guitar, which I realize now the irony of that song being about someone named Drew and then me being married to my husband, Andrew. Long story short, I've been around for a long time, and just because I'm a Swiftie doesn't mean I have blind praise for every single thing. So I do want to discuss in a full separate episode, and I can also give you an update on my Taylor Swift album rankings, which was an episode that I did last year. So I can link that in the show notes if you want to hear my thoughts up through the Tortured Poets department. But there's definitely things to discuss for Life of a Showgirl, so I want to talk about that next week. Also, I have started season 9 of Love is Blind, which is the Denver season. I gotta say, I've watched through episode 7 right now, and I'm not really finding as many people to root for as I would like to, in a sense. Right now, I am primarily rooting for Jordan, I think, and I don't know. Like I said, I've watched through episode 7. Things could change in 8 and 9. I'm worried for some of my girls in this situation. Also, this man, Nick, everything that comes out of his mouth, I just like vehemently disagree with. It's actually astounding. I do like KB though. I have hopes for Sparkle Megan and her person. I don't want to really give away any spoilers because I know people are still watching. But if you have Love is Blind thoughts, I would love to hear them. Feel free to DM me, and you guys can always let me know what you're creating and consuming by sending an email, leaving a comment if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening on Spotify, reach out because I always am looking for new things to watch, read, eat counts for consuming as well. I haven't really done an eat consuming recently, but that's mostly because I've been making like my same weeknight fixation dinners on repeat just while we've been getting settled in. With that being said, let's get into the topic of today's episode, which is tips for a seamless home renovation. And we say seamless optimistically because there will be things that go wrong, and I think honestly even knowing that from the jump made this process easier on me as someone who does like to get things right the first time, is known to be a bit of a perfectionist, and who has a little bit of trouble sometimes outsourcing or relinquishing control in certain areas. However, I am not handy whatsoever. I'm terrible with a hammer, even worse with a wrench. So we did hire contractors for this project, and I will also talk more about hiring contractors and the process for that. And I'm also really grateful to everyone who advised us to do what we could before we actually moved in. And I think that's even more true for an apartment compared to a home, because it really did get dusty in here. It really was like noisy and disruptive, obviously, which we're really grateful that so far all of the neighbors that we've met have been understanding about that. But also, like, there's really not anywhere to go or to hide. Like, if someone was renovating the bathroom behind me right now while we were living here, it would be pretty disruptive. So we got really, really lucky in the sense that we did have a little bit of overlap from the time we closed on this place and got our keys to the time our lease ended last month in September. So we chose to take advantage of that. Obviously, that means spending more upfront after you've already spent most of your money in a sense. But honestly, I think for the peace of mind and to be able to move in and have everything just as we wanted it, it did end up making sense for us to do that. So I'm super happy we made the decision to do so. If you are considering doing a home renovation, the first thing I would do, like the second that you have the thought, is to start gathering inspiration. It is never too early to start brainstorming or dreaming or creating a Pinterest board to transform a space in your home, whether you are just moving into a new place or whether you've lived in your place for a few years and you're ready for a refresh or an upgrade. We can't talk about gathering inspiration without mentioning Pinterest boards. I mean, Pinterest has so many great use cases, but there may be few better than the home renovation and home decor inspiration that is on Pinterest. It is truly top tier. I got so many ideas from looking through Pinterest, and it was just so easy to have everything all in one place. So the very first thing I would do is create a Pinterest board. You can make this a secret board. You can also invite someone else to the board if you have a collaborator. I mean, Andrew and I obviously worked on the designs and agreed on everything together, but we just did the Pinterest board on my account and we kind of like sat down and looked at it at the same time. So whatever's easiest for you. And I would just start saving anything and everything that looks interesting to you. And then you're going to go back in later and kind of cull through and say, okay, what about this particular image do I like? And that's going to help you hone in on what you're really looking for and what type of style or tile or design concept you want to apply to the space that you're looking at. And then also on the same page of gathering inspiration early, kind of like parallel to the Pinterest board, I would also suggest creating a Google Doc. I personally created a Notion hub. I created a whole like home ownership hub for us in the home search process and everything. But I did have a page for inspiration and products that I thought we were ultimately going to purchase. So, for example, I knew we were going to need like a double vanity for the primary bathroom. So, when I was basically putting that concept together, I was like, okay, I know I want a double vanity. I think I want it to be light wood with a marble top. I started at the Home Depot. That's where I started for pretty much every single search that I did. Start in a place like that and say, okay, I'm just going to go through and pull links for as many vanities that fit that description as I possibly can. I'll figure out later on which ones specifically I want to buy, but at least I already have like 5 or 6 options in front of me so that when the time comes to order it, I already have kind of narrowed down and I have some good options in front of me. And I could later like change my mind slightly or make that decision based on, okay, the measurements really need to be more in line with this, or like, oh, I didn't realize that the drawer next to the sink is like a fake half drawer. I would rather there just not be something there, or that there would be a cabinet instead. All of the little things that you'll realize like over time as you start really starting to visualize how everything's going to fit together, and also what the limitations of the space are after you consult with your contractor or whoever you're working with. And I think looking for common themes amidst the images that you're saving can be super helpful too. So I realized that I was saving a lot of checkerboard style floors, and a lot of them were black and white, which I thought might have been too high contrast for the kitchen. But at least I had already planted the seed that that was a style that I liked. I knew Andrew liked it as well. So I was always having that in the back of my head when I was thinking about the kitchen, even if it didn't end up being the exact visual that we had there. I was like, I do like this kind of, it almost feels like a diner, a little bit more of a vintagey vibe, a little less like modern, just because I knew for the countertops, we were probably going to go with something pretty modern, which we did. We have a quartz countertop and we have a waterfall over the peninsula. And then we also have that same stone continued up as the backsplash. So that in and of itself is already a very modern style and vibe. Once I noticed that there were 3 or 4 images with that kind of checkerboard floor pattern, though, I knew that it was something I wanted to save and come back to. And again, I kind of tried to work with Andrew, especially in the early stages of this planning process, to make sure overall vibe wise we were on the same page with what we were going for. So some other things that were a common theme in the images we were saving for this Pinterest inspiration board were bookshelves, natural lighting, hardwood floors, wooden bed frames, brass and gold hardware as opposed to silver or nickel hardware. And then there are some things that like don't apply to this current space that we ended up in. Like I was seeing a lot of arched doorways and entryways and also window benches. Like I would love to have those things in a future home, but they're not things that we're going to like restructure this apartment to hope that they have, you know what I mean? Doing this exercise and identifying what we liked also helped us identify what we knew we didn't want. For example, we saw a lot of kitchens with really dramatic marble, and I think that is such a cool look, but like I just knew that realistically that probably wasn't going to be what we wanted. I wanted something very like clean and simple. I love dark colors from time to time, but I wanted to make sure that our spaces still felt like bright and happy for the most part. So again, little things like that and identifying those I feel like really helped speed along the process later, where we were able to come up with a few keywords to describe our vision for our home and our design aesthetic. And then if there was something later on that didn't fit those things, we could kind of cross it off or say that's not for us because I know that it doesn't fit in this kind of description of our home. And some of the words that I wrote down to describe our aesthetic that we kind of kept coming back to were clean, classic, warm, sophisticated, and hotel inspired. That one was me because who doesn't want to come home and feel like they're living in a hotel? Like my goal with both bathrooms was I want to feel like I am staying at a luxurious hotel like the Maker, and I want to have that feeling of luxury every day when I come home, so that this is the place where I can really go and relax and be like, God, I cannot wait to take a shower there. You know what I mean? And I think if you're having a hard time deciding on design inspiration for one room, I would really try to narrow down and just focus on one hero piece. Like, what is one thing that you are sure that you want in the space that you can build other things around? Because for me, in our guest bathroom, it ended up being this green accent tile and also this beautiful dark brown vanity. Like those two things really guided what the rest of the room ended up looking like. And same thing with the kitchen. Like once I saw the countertop, and I pretty much saw the countertop and was like, that one, I love that one specifically. That helped inform the cabinet color that I was picking, the hardware, the floor. Like it really set the tone for everything else that came after it. Once you've begun to save things that you like, and once you also have links to a few specific products, like a hero product that you know you want to focus on, my next big tip is to use Canva to mock up your designs. Now, we all know I love Canva. We don't need to harp on that anymore. I talk about it, I feel like, every couple of episodes at least. And I also got to work with Canva this year on Instagram. So that was hugely exciting for me. And even though my partnership with Canva and most of what I use Canva for is actually work related, like creating affiliate graphics and collages for my blog and headers for email newsletters and all of that kind of stuff, I personally also could not explain to you how helpful it was to be able to use Canva to mock up some of my design ideas and what I was thinking about. And I think this was helpful for a few reasons. Number one, it really helped me visualize what the space was going to look like and spot potential design flaws before they happened. And I feel like because of this, it was able to save me a lot of time and money in the grand scheme of things. For example, with the guest bathroom, initially I knew I wanted to have obviously the vanity pretty much centered, like where the piping already was, and that I wanted to do some kind of cool wall design. I wasn't totally sure what yet. And at first, I had this idea of doing two sconces on either side of the mirror for the vanity lighting in the bathroom. But because of where the toilet is next to the vanity and because of where the bathtub and the shower is next to the vanity, there's not really that much space there. And I realized later on after doing this Canva mockup that instead of having the two sconces on the sides of the mirrors, I should really pick one fixture to go above the mirror because I had height to work with, but I didn't have as much breathing room on the sides and I didn't want it to end up looking squished together or too cluttered. Also, the vanity that I fell in love with came in a couple of different sizes. The first style that I actually fell in love with was, I believe, a 42-inch vanity or 48 inches. I ended up getting the 36-inch version, again, just because even though we could have potentially fit the other one, I realized that spacing wise, I just wanted something that was a little bit more compact. And that is something that I was able to draw a conclusion about after seeing it visually in the Canva mockup that I made. Not only did it help me spot design flaws, but it also helped me communicate my ideas. So, first, obviously, I showed my ideas to Andrew, and I'm actually so glad that I was able to do this because it helped me veer away from my initial vision for the bathroom to what we actually ended up with. My initial vision for the guest bath was to do some kind of beadboard or wainscoting on the lower half of the wall, and then to do a wallpaper actually on the top half of the wall. And I really liked this concept in theory, but I was having a hard time with color matching. I was having a hard time finding a wallpaper that both Andrew and I really loved. Like, there were a bunch that I loved, there were some that he liked that I was kind of not as excited about. So it was just getting harder to find a middle ground. And I just was like, knowing that I wanted the guest bath to be a little bit more fun and a little bit more special. I wanted our primary bath to feel very spa like and serene, but I wanted the guest bath to have a little bit of personality and fun. But I'm really glad that I was able to visualize that and demonstrate it because even as Andrew didn't necessarily like totally see the vision for it, which is fair and understandable, I also kind of started to fall out of love with it the more that I was looking at it. And then when I said, what if instead of doing wallpaper, we did tile? So then I was thinking we could do a beadboard with a half wall of tile. And then at some point, I just dropped the beadboard entirely. And we ended up with the wall of tile that we have now, like the green accent wall. And I can't even explain to you, like, this is infinitely better than what I first started out with. And I got to make those mistakes in Canva and also make sure that I was creating something that both Andrew and I truly, truly loved. So it helped me communicate to him. And then it also did help communicate with our contractors. Like, I was able to show our contractor mock-ups for both bathrooms, and I feel like because I was able to do that, we had fewer mistakes during the installation process because there was already a pretty clear visual of exactly what we wanted. Once you've gone through this initial inspiration process, I think it's also helpful to set your budget and figure out what timeline you are working with. I actually have the same advice for budgeting with a home renovation as I was given when it came to budgeting for our wedding, which was really to figure out what your priorities are and put most of your money into what your priorities are. Now, I was pretty good about keeping a detailed spreadsheet of everything that we spent for this renovation when it came to the total costs of everything. So I'm not going to share exact numbers in this breakdown, but I did do a percentage calculation of where the renovation budget actually went, just to give you a sense. Okay, so to start out with, 45% of our budget went towards labor. So this meant that we outsourced all of the actual building of things and construction to a contractor. Now, I'm pretty sure I said this at the top of the episode, although, like I said, this is my second day trying to record this episode, so I may have said it yesterday. I am not handy. I am not a DIY queen. And when I look at this budget breakdown, though, the fact that 45% of our budget did go to labor and our contractors, I can see why people choose to DIY projects. Just given the fact, though, that I work and that I did not have 2 months to take off fully and freely. If you can somehow manage to DIY your home renovation, I feel like that can cut your cost pretty much in half right there. However, I am really happy that we left the actual building and installation of everything to the professionals, especially given our timeline. We really didn't have a lot of time to like wait and see or make mistakes and then correct them. And I ultimately do feel like we saved a lot of time and money by outsourcing to a general contractor. They also purchased a lot of like back end building materials that we didn't even know we needed. They also handled all of the trash removal throughout the renovation process, which was super helpful. They were able to install all of the fixtures, so all of the lights, all of the mirrors. They even ended up mounting our frame TV, which was not in the initial scope of work. We like ended up adding that on later. It just was so nice to like have someone else take care of all of that. And they also painted for us and they purchased all of the paint, so that all got added into the budget that I spent towards contractors. Oh, and they also painted all of the rooms and bought the paint from the Home Depot that I like, I sent the colors and they actually went and like picked it up and bought it and brought it back here. So all of that considered, that all accounted for the 45% of the budget that went to labor. Okay, our kitchen was 27% of the budget, and like 99% of this 27% was the countertops and the cabinets. Understandably so. The next thing was 16% of the budget was spent on the bathrooms. I would say tile ended up being the most expensive piece of that, followed by the glass that we needed for the bathtub door and the shower door, and also the two vanities that we bought. 10% of our budget went towards new appliances, so we got all new kitchen appliances. We also were advised by our home inspector to switch out our hot water heater because it was 9 years old. They say, like, they could go to 12 years, but it's probably better to replace it earlier so you don't have any issues. So we did choose to do that. And then we also got a new washer dryer. And then lastly, I probably honestly could have left this off of here because it's only 2%, but renovating our fireplace ended up being 2%. It ended up being a pretty quick and easy DIY for us. At first, I was anticipating it potentially costing more because we were thinking about getting stone from our countertop vendor, which we did not end up doing just because it ended up being way more expensive and it still wouldn't have really made sense, like the cost versus what we would have gotten. So we ended up being able to make this work with some tile that we ordered for the bathroom and didn't end up using, and also buying a mantle shelf from Wayfair. Now, when it comes to choosing products and also specifically like appliances, especially like washer, dryer, microwave, even your sink and faucet and stuff like that, I personally feel like just reading as many of the product reviews as you can, or even watching YouTube videos. There were lots of brands and things that we were looking at that actually had many different YouTube reviews. Reading the reviews and watching those videos really helped us research the products that we were buying to make sure that we were choosing the best ones for our space and our needs. And we did a bit of divide and conquer with that. Like Andrew really took charge with all the appliances and made those decisions, which was super helpful. And then I also think that for any big purchases like that, if you have time throughout your project, ours ended up taking, I guess I would say like 2 months in total. Like the actual renovations took place over 6 weeks, but there was kind of a pre-period of looking for a contractor, which I'll talk about next, and doing some initial planning and design brainstorm, like I already said, but also making note of anything you want to purchase and seeing if there's an opportunity to get it at a discount coming up. So for us, I knew that I wanted to get the Samsung Frame TV. This has been a dream of mine, like on a wish list item, you could call it, for a couple of years now. So I already knew that I wanted it. It was really just a matter of like when to pull the trigger and buy, so to speak. And we ended up being able to get the Frame TV at a discount for Labor Day because there was a Labor Day sale going on. So Labor Day, Memorial Day, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, any of those that you happen to be near or close to, I would definitely try to grab your big purchases like that during a holiday where there may be some kind of sale or discount. And I joked in the renovation vlog that I posted on YouTube that I really felt like my job for 6 weeks was like project manager of this renovation, but I really appreciate that I did treat it like a second job and that I did take it seriously, because I do think that me spending a lot of time and attention making sure that things got done on time, just checking in, progress updates, asking questions, things like that really did help keep things on track and accommodate everything pretty much getting done before our move deadline. And I would have the timeline and budget that you tell your contractor, and also in the back of your head what the real timeline and budget actually are, because there is a chance that you'll go over whatever amount you end up telling the contractor. It could just be for random reasons. Something could get lost in the mail, something broke, just giving you a couple of examples of things that happened to us along the process of actually renovating the place. And in terms of timeline, depending on material availability, we were lucky to do this in 2025 when pretty much everything we wanted was readily available. But I know a lot of people who were probably renovating or hoping to renovate in 2020 and 2021 were probably pretty impacted by supply chain issues and delays and all of that. So we ended up telling our contractors that we were moving in mid-September, like September 15th, I think was the initial date that I gave. But in reality, we had 10 more days until our lease was up after that. And I'm glad that we were pushing to get everything done by the 15th, because in an ideal world, we would have gotten everything done by then and we would have had 10 days with the fully finished apartment to start bringing more stuff over and do like a deep clean and have just extra time and peace of mind. What ended up happening was 99% of stuff actually did get done before we moved, and then the day after we moved was when the backsplash went in. And then early the next week was when the frame TV got installed and when we regrouted the bathroom floor in the primary bathroom. So it did still take a few days even after we moved to finish everything, but it would have been potentially pushed back if I had given like our actual lease end date and our actual move-in date as the timeline date. I feel like the true reason to do this is obviously not to like intentionally lie or be deceitful. It's really just to give yourself a buffer and that peace of mind. To talk briefly about our experience looking for contractors, I really think that researching contractors and just doing everything you can to fully vet them is going to be super helpful, because when you hire the right people from the beginning, you're going to save yourself a lot of time and back and forth and stress ultimately. So the very first thing that I did was just start doing some Googling for local contractors, local to whether it was like Northern New Jersey, Hudson County, or even Hoboken and Jersey City specifically. And from there, I then started to go on their website, look at their previous work, check out their social media. Although I will say, contractors, I'm sure that there's so much going on and there's literally barely time to do anything, but social media might not always be the most telling. So I would definitely stick more to their websites and their Google reviews. And then one other thing I did too was check out this local Hoboken Facebook group that I'm in and literally just search like general contractor home renovation and see if people had previously asked for recommendations for that. I had a bunch of posts that I was able to search through, so I didn't need to post my own. But if you search in a local group and nothing comes up, you could always post your own post in a Facebook group and ask for recommendations. But scrolling through the comments and seeing what people said within the confines of a Facebook group versus a public facing Google review or reviews that contractors may choose to post on their websites was also really helpful. So what ended up happening was I ended up doing 2 free consultations with 2 different contractors. So one contractor actually came and met me at this apartment, came and took some measurements. I showed like the initial Canva designs and stuff, and we kind of talked together about what things could look like, what the budget might potentially be, and when we could really get started with stuff, like what their availability was as well. And then another contractor I did a phone call with, although that one I kind of had a weird sense about from the beginning, because I scheduled the call and the call came and went and like no one reached out to me. There wasn't a number for me to call. It was just like a we'll call you type of thing. And then when I did finally get the guy on the phone, like, I don't know, there was something about it where it felt like they would have been super involved in the design process, whereas I already had like really clear design ideas of what I wanted to do. And I initially ended up choosing the first contractor just because he communicated clearly. Even if he was like running late, I always got a heads up about it. And I felt like I would have total and complete freedom with my designs. And all of the reviews that I read for the contractor that I chose were overwhelmingly positive and also really specific. And you can also ask your contractor for references and recommendations too. And I also did some Googling for good questions to ask a contractor. So during the free consultations, I made sure to ask a bunch of these questions, which was obviously like estimated timeline, as I already talked about, and budget. And also, along with budget, like, is there a payment plan? What all is included? Like I said, they actually had a lot of building materials for like whatever waterproof lining they needed to put behind the tile for the shower initially. That was all included in the cost of labor and hiring the contractor versus like me just buying the tile and the grout that we needed. But I didn't know that you can't just put tile and grout on a regular wall. It needs to like have this whole waterproof thing and all of the reasons, again, that I outsourced this to someone else. And then a few other things too, like, do you design in house? Again, for the contractor I chose, I was the one who was in charge of all the designs. Although, if I had no ideas or needed some help, we could have hired another designer, like as a third party contractor to help us with that. Whereas the other person that I talked to, it was like a husband wife duo. The guy did all of the contracting and his wife did all of the design. And I didn't want to be like, hey, I don't care about what you have to say because like I already have my own ideas. So that definitely felt more like someone who was more involved and was a bit more of like a package deal in that sense, which could be great for someone who has no idea what they want, by the way. I also asked, how does supervision work on site? Because my contractor, who was my main contact, like, he wasn't always here every single day, but there were usually workers here, and he would usually come to stop and check in like around noon each day that they were there. So that was good to hear that like he was still going to be coming by and like checking in on stuff like that. This will hopefully be a given, but just making sure, like, are they licensed? Do they have permits? Can they get certificates of insurance if needed? Our building, since we're not the only ones who live here, required a lot of like that stuff up front, you know, certificate of insurance, making sure the elevators and stuff were padded for the days where they were going to be moving like heavy things or trash in and out. Also, what's the typical communication plan? So my contractor and I ended up communicating primarily via text, which I actually like hate in most working relationships. But when it came to something as timely and as important as this, text made the most sense. Like, we were emailing a little bit in the beginning. I had sent over a list of materials once we kind of picked out everything that we wanted, including vanities, toilets, tiles, all of that stuff. That obviously is better served in a Google Doc, I think. But like for quick questions, like, I was able to just text and say yes or no to things. I was able to communicate really quickly. Hey, like, this just got dropped off downstairs. Most of the time the team was able to go down and bring stuff up, so it meant I was back and forth a little bit less, which was really helpful. So yeah, all of those questions were really key. And even though I feel like, because the contractors were here and I was able to communicate and they were able to take care of a lot of stuff during the day while I wasn't here, I was still here pretty much every day. Like, I would come after they left every day and kind of just assess the progress, make note of any questions that I had, see if there was anything that needed to be fixed or that I didn't end up liking. So checking in on the progress as much as possible ended up being really important for this project, I think. I think also being here in real time was just helpful too, to understand the constraints of the space and understand like what ideas that I had that maybe we could see through and what ideas that we had that maybe couldn't be seen through. I think being here also and seeing the progress also helped me understand why we could and could not like do certain things. So for example, originally in the primary shower, I wanted to have a built-in shelf in the wall where the shelf would kind of like go back a little bit so that we could put like shampoo bottles and things like that, but that it would be done in the tile that we chose and look really seamless. We ended up not being able to do that just because of the drywall and the fact that, you know, at a certain point too, once we go beyond the studs, like, that's not really our apartment at that point. It's like part of the rest of the building. So that ended up being one thing that I was able to like see in real time while I was there. But another thing on the other side that I noticed was, originally in both of our bathrooms, there were built-in medicine cabinets. We ended up removing both of those, especially because they were kind of in random places. And then instead of reinstalling installing the medicine cabinets, what we ended up doing was actually repairing the drywall and just evening out the wall and filling it in the guest bathroom. And then for the primary bath, we were able to use the drywall or the sheetrock. By the way, I have no idea what these terms are. I'm just like trying to pair it back to you what I remember my contractor telling me, but I don't know if I'm using these terms right. Basically, they were able to keep the hole where the medicine cabinet was, but fill it in so it looked like it was part of the wall, but it still had this indentation where the medicine cabinet went back into the wall. And from there, I literally just ordered a piece of wood from the Home Depot, and they cut the wood into two pieces and were able to create open shelving in the wall. So even though I wasn't able to get the built-in shelf where the shower was, just because of the nature of like our apartment and those limitations, because there was a medicine cabinet and there was already a hole in the wall on the other side of the room, I was able to get some product storage, which, as you know, for me as a beauty gal, was highly important. And being here every day did help me catch a few things along the way. Honestly, nothing too major, which was good, but we did notice that in the guest bath at first, the little soap shelf that goes on the wall in the bath was actually hung upside down. And also, the towel bar for the guest bathroom was initially hung on a wall where a hook was going to go. So, like, just being there and being like, hey, this is supposed to be over here, and having them fix it like within 5 or 10 minutes was a way to make sure that we stayed on track as much as we could. And one of the things that was highly distracting about this whole process was that I would have thoughts like all throughout the day, just like random thoughts, random questions that I wanted to make sure I was able to address. So one of my biggest tips for that would just be to keep a running list of everything, of all of your questions. I, again, personally did this on Notion because I also have Notion on both my phone and desktop, so I can update it regardless of where I am. You could also use the Notes app. You could, plan to send out weekly emails to your contractor and draft it in your inbox that way. But whatever it is, just making sure that you write it down when you first have the thought so that you don't forget anything is a great way to make sure that you can ask all of your questions and keep your project on track. And also, if you don't like something, to speak up sooner rather than later. So one specific example for me was in the primary bathroom. I did end up asking them to re-grout the floors in a darker grout color because initially I chose a color that I thought was pretty dark, but because we chose a black hexagon tile for the floor in the primary bath, the tile was so dark that it kind of made any grout next to it look really light in comparison. So instead of this color, which I initially chose called natural gray, which I was like, oh, I'm sure that'll be like a medium to dark contrast. It ended up being almost like bright white looking, and the whole floor was looking a lot more like honeycomb than this kind of like sleek black modern floor that I had in mind. So I did bring this up to my contractor, who was very understanding and was like, I think we need a charcoal grout to get the look you're talking about. So he ended up being able to like go to the Home Depot that day, get the grout, and send one of his guys up to re-grout the floor and get that done. I am glad that I ended up saying something about that because it didn't end up costing that much more to have them redo it anyway, and I feel a lot better about the overall look. And that's one of those things where sometimes I feel like the end of a project can be slightly dragged out, but for me, it was really important to make use of our contractors while they were still like available to us and while we still had like one more payment left to give them. The way that it worked for our payment plan, just for context too, was we paid like an initial deposit, then we paid like a pretty large sum, like whatever the biggest payment was, we paid after the bathrooms were completed. And then there was a smaller sum for the very end of the project that, again, as long as like we still could potentially like add to that before we were finished, I wanted to make sure that I like asked all my questions, that like everything was screwed on straight, like the switch plate covers, like literally all of those little things before saying, okay, we're finally done. Like, here's the last payment. You know what I mean? And I have to say, like, really doing all of the planning in advance, finding the right contractors, giving ourselves a little bit of a buffer with both the budget and the timeline, I feel like are a bunch of things that made this go pretty much as smoothly as it could have. Like, yes, it was still stressful, but there were no like disasters or like really anxiety inducing moments other than ones that I created in my own head throughout this process. And I feel like planning and staying organized with it was really, really helpful to ensure that like everything got done in a timely fashion and that everything looked good and perfect as much as it could be. And to round out this episode, is there anything I would do differently looking back now that I've done this once before, now that I know what I know? I mean, if I could have had more time to make decisions, if I could have had more time so as not to be like rushed in a sense, obviously I think that's what people probably would say most of the time, but at the end of the day, like the timing worked out as close to perfectly as it could have, given that we did still have to finish out our lease either way. Like the timing of when we got our apartment and like when we found the one just happened to be what it was. And even though we still had a few months left on our lease, it actually would have been more expensive, I think, ultimately to try to break our lease than it would have been to just like stay the remaining time that we were there. So everything ended up working out as well as it could have, I would say, timing wise, in terms of the fact that we even had like a 2 month overlap there where we were able to come in and do a bunch of renovations, even though not everything ended up being finished right before we moved in. It wasn't the worst case scenario by any means. I would also have asked at the top of each week what the work schedule was for the contractors and what the plan was, because at first when we started, obviously they were there every day, and then towards the end, like there were some times where they were waiting on things to be delivered or where they had to go to other projects. Then sometimes I would come over and like there was nothing done from the previous time I had been there, and I would be like, what? Like, where were they today? Or like, what? Like, we are moving in a few weeks. Like, why weren't they here doing this or why weren't they here doing that? And obviously, like, the contractor who I hired has to space out like his workers and manage multiple projects, which I completely understand. It was more so just like I ended up being confused, but like all I would have had to do was ask which days they're working so that I'm not like surprised when I go and check in and be like, oh, it's the same as yesterday. Nothing got done, because everything did end up getting done eventually. It was just like I didn't know which days specifically they were planning to be here all the time. Another thing I would have done was brought a sample of our cabinet wood when I went to go look at countertops, because I went to the countertop vendor, which was this place in northern New Jersey called Reliance Surfaces. And I walked in and there's all these like, beautiful slabs of stuff that I can like walk through and like write down the names of the ones that I like and stuff. And I showed the woman who met me at the showroom like a picture of the cabinet, and she was like, oh, most people bring a sample of the wood. Like that everyone in the world somehow knows that. And I didn't know that. And I was like, oh, okay. I just have a lowly photo on my phone, but I understand. So I probably would have asked my countertop and cabinet vendor, who that was recommended to me through my contractor. So that was also like one less vendor I had to find. Like he already had a local contact for that he was able to like recommend me to. So I just kind of went with that, because at that point I was like one less person for me to find externally anyway. But I probably would have asked them for a sample to bring with me to that showroom just to see what it looked like together. Actually, I think they look beautiful together in person. But also on a similar note to that, I wish that I had ordered more tile samples and kind of stuck things next to each other just to see what everything would look like. The big one that I ordered a tile sample for was the green accent wall, and I made sure to order like 4 different tiles because they all look a little bit different. Like there's slight color variation to each one. So I really just wanted to make sure like I liked the shade of green in person. For pretty much everything else, I was able to go to the Home Depot and see it in person, so I didn't actually need to buy the samples. However, for the primary shower, initially we had a different tile for the floor of the shower, which is actually what we ended up using on our fireplace. And I was told that that tile would have been too big for the floor of the primary shower. So to pick a smaller, like mosaic tile, which I did, but because I didn't get to put that tile next to the wall tile, I personally feel like the white hexagon tile that I chose for the primary shower floor is a much brighter white contrasted next to like the cream tile of the wall. So to me, I think there's a little bit of a design disconnect personally. Like, oh, in the grand scheme of things, does everything look fine and like clean and nice? Yes. But if I had been like thinking a little bit more or had a little bit more time to find a replacement tile for that, I think if I had initially put those 2 tiles next to each other, I would have been like, oh, this one's like so much brighter than this. Maybe I should try to find something a little bit more creamy or with a bit more of like a yellow white undertone or something. But if that's my biggest problem or regret right now, I'm doing okay. And I think that just like not being afraid to ask questions throughout the process, there are a couple of times where I wish I had asked more questions or pushed for like a little bit more of my input for certain things too. And I think just again, over communicating, especially about deadlines. Like I had told our contractor our mid September deadline for everything, but looking back on my emails, I realized I had never told the cabinet and countertop vendor that. So the fact that like we were waiting on countertops and maybe things could have been ordered earlier if they had known the deadline, like I just assumed once I told one person, everyone knew, which was the wrong assumption on my part. So that's one of the reasons that I think the countertops got a little bit delayed and that the backsplash had to be installed after we moved in. But again, all in all, if that was one of the big issues, quote unquote, from the renovation, it was resolved within like 24 hours of us moving in. So it ended up not being too big of a deal. But thank you guys so much for listening to today's episode. I really hope you enjoyed. I definitely learned a lot from this experience. And I'm sure there are some things that I've forgotten, but I really tried to write down like the key things that really helped me do this renovation, do it in 6 weeks, and not go crazy or have any breakdowns really throughout the process. I mean, Andrew, if you're listening, tell me if I'm wrong and I broke down about something. I can't remember for sure, but I really don't remember having any meltdowns. It was more just like making sure and being like hyper focused that everything was actually getting done, things were getting checked off. We were meeting deadlines for when we needed to order stuff. Contractors were meeting deadlines for when we actually needed to be here. And I wake up every day just like so in love with how everything turned out and just feeling really grateful to actually finally be here now. Literally visualizing me like sitting here, recording the podcast, making my morning coffee in the kitchen, like all of those things were things that I kept in the back of my mind as I walked in and this place was covered in dust and like there was no semblance of like any plumbing or the fact that anything might even really end up existing here. So to be able to wake up here every single day is truly something that I don't take for granted. I'll talk to you guys in next week's episode.